This is a Culture Inject production.
Welcome back, folks, to Part of Us, and welcome to a really special episode where we are going to dive into the worlds of In Vogue and the Spice Girls, two iconic groups, two different eras, but both sharing a spotlight for their impact on music and culture. But first, we got to remind you where to find us. Please make sure that you are downloading episodes of our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and Amazon Music, and that you're following us on all the socials. We are on Twitter or X at Part of Us Fancast, and you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram at In Vogue Craze. Let's get into this episode. In Vogue news, we have the return, heavy question mark, of Maxine. We have an exclusive insider scoop. Brace yourselves. Maxine is making a comeback to In Vogue. Allegedly. Heavy on the allegedly. Maybe. According to our insider who was hanging out with Max at the Tony show in Vegas in November, she spilled the beans about touring with Terry, Cindy, and Rona again. Quote, I hung out with Max at the Tony show in Vegas last night. She said she would be touring with Cindy, Terry, and Rona in 2024. End quote. We contacted Maxine's manager for a comment, and he rejected the idea of her joining the group for a tour next year, saying, and I quote, "Who said Max was touring with Evie next year? News to me." So what are y'all's thoughts? Do y'all think it's for real? Are we being elusive here? Like, what's going on? Are we playing a game, or is it just sort of all fallacies and fairy tales?
Feels like fallacies and fairy tales. I'm not going to get my hopes up. Although, I mean, she should tour with them because why not? Like,
get the coin.
Exactly.
Yeah, I kind of second that. But I mean, I think, again, there's this really huge opportunity that's sort of just sitting here on the table. All of these women are able-bodied and, you know, they're still in good mind, creative mind. I've always kind of hoped for a home again, new edition sort of complete sort of recording touring set of In Vogue, which would include, you know, Rona, Cindy, Terry, Maxine, and Yes Dawn. Looked like we were going to get that at one point. Obviously that didn't pan out that way, but, you know, Maxine rejoining with them would be very interesting, and I think it could lead to a lot if things work out, but you never know. Never say never.
I agree. Part of me wants them to stay, like, it's kind of like it, what am I trying to say here? It kind of like, not cheapens, but it like dilutes an eventual reunion if they were to get back together as a 5-piece. If like Maxine joins now, then Dawn comes later. Like, so if that's the end goal and we're working towards that, I'd rather them all just like do it in one sort of big moment. But I don't know that that's going to happen given the sort of like sketchy, checkered kind of way Dawn moves business-wise. I don't know what the deal is over there. So if we get Max in the meantime, I don't hate the idea. I actually kind of love it. And I think that she seems like she's in a really good place, probably creatively in the best place she's been. And I think she could juggle the creative endeavors that she wants to do as a solo artist with her performances and such, and also still do In Vogue at the same time. So my fingers are crossed, my fingers and my toes.
Here's hoping.
Cindy and her daughter Natalia showcased their harmonizing skills in a video that Cindy shared on her Instagram page. So did you watch the video, and what did you think? Were you surprised to learn that Cindy's daughter is a singer too?
I was. I mean, I actually saw this prior to, I think I followed all of the ladies, but I saw it, I thought it was adorable, and they sounded great. So I love that the singing, like, the knack for singing gets passed along. I always love when that happens between like parents and children. So I don't know if there's also another video out there. I think I somehow ended up on it like when I was like going down a rabbit hole from this video. But there's another video where her daughter Natalia is actually singing "Don't Let Go," and she sounds great. So
I couldn't tell them apart. I was like, wait, which one is Cindy? Yeah, it's a little like, we need more family bands. Like, where, like back in the 70s, there was all of these like siblings and, you know, people.
Yeah.
People would start little musical groups. That was the way out of the hood. But I guess now everybody's a rapper. You know who has a
I think it's Wanye's kids from Boys.
Oh yeah,
to Men.
Juan Moore. Yeah.
But apparently, like, the tea is that they're beefing with Wanye. So like, for some reason, he don't post about their stuff, and they're like getting put on right now, and they're doing a lot of I think they were in the studio with Mary J. Blige and all this other kind of stuff, and so
yeah, like she's managing them now or something. Like they're they're signed to her. But the tea is he stopped dealing with them when he got with his new wife allegedly.
Oh, that's messy.
But see, this is probably why family groups don't really
work
out. Because I'm a big Sister Sledge fan, and that was always so sad that they were sort of they weren't feuding. They were kind of in a lull of feuding, but I think things have kicked back off since Joni Sledge's passing. But groups, I mean, grown adults who aren't related have to work to get along. So I can't even imagine what it must be like to be family, and that has its own interpersonal dynamics. And then you add business and celebrity, and it's a firestorm in the making, basically.
I can see that, but it seems at the same time it will be easier than dealing with strangers, because I guess maybe like where I'm from, like they're your siblings, so you're gonna get along. Like even if you don't get along, you still gotta deal with them. Versus like if you're a stranger, if I don't like you, I don't have to deal with you. Like we can sever ties. But I guess where I come from, like if you're family, then like you're stuck together, so you can hate each other, but figure it out because you got to coexist.
I think there's like something about like when you assemble your kids, like when they're kids, when they start, I think it's easier. But I think when you have kids that grow from being like under the sort of control of a parent or a manager / parent, like that dynamic, it's really tricky when there's the Janet Jackson control sort of thing, right? Like when you eventually do want to grow into your own identity and your own self. And I feel like that's when it gets kind of wild. I don't know, like it feels sometimes like that's the sort of breaking point oftentimes is when folks grow out of that sort of like kid thing and into the grown folks thing. Side note, this is so random, but it made me think of them. But if you ever wanted like a fun listen, and they're like kind of like I think people would write them off as a bit of a one-hit wonder, especially in the States. But like, I just was re-listening to Cleopatra. Do you remember Cleopatra?
Mm-hmm. I think I still have a CD single somewhere around here.
They had a really interesting and fun follow-up album that didn't get a whole lot of attention, and they had some really interesting production. I think Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis did some tracks. Deborah Killings produced a track. They had really shifted them into a much heavier kind of like R&B sound. I mean, they were already kind of R&B, but it definitely leaned a little bit more pop on that first sort of album. But anyway, it's on streaming. It's really interesting listen when you want to sort of imagine a little bit growner sound for them. But they were also sisters, so that's what made me think.
I didn't realize they were sisters, but I never liked. I mean, I think I saw something recently about them. Did one of did the lead singer like audition for The Voice or something?
She did, like a couple of years ago. I think she went pretty far, and it was the UK version. And I think she went pretty far in the competition. She didn't win, but she went pretty far.
I never understood, why was she the only lead singer? Like, the other girls didn't sing at all. Like, her name is Cleopatra. They named the entire group after her.
I mean, it's like LaBelle, or Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells. I mean,
Patti was, Patti was Patti. Like,
but she wouldn't have been it. But we love Patti. But I mean, I don't think the group would have worked without Sarah or Nona. And Nona was a songwriter. She was the one doing the bulk of the songwriting when they transitioned out of the Bluebells phase. But I was going to mention Eternal, who were sort of precursors to the Spice Girls. And Louise would go on, I forget her name. She would go on to become a very successful solo career, but because she was the white member. But the other two members, two of them were sisters. And so, and they've had their own thing. But to sort of go back to your one point, Josh, and I guess it connects back to what we're going to explore today with In Vogue and the Spice Girls. I think whether it's a family route, or whether it's friends, or if it's even people put together for a business sort of thing, I think when you put people together, groups are great, but then people still, it's human nature to want to grow separately and to explore. And I think sometimes the best groups that have been able to achieve a balance of that are ones that allow for the individuals to sort of, they put the group on pause and they want to go out and explore, and then they can come back when they're ready to create. And I think like Take That has done really well with that. You know, the group that Robbie Williams had come out of, the boy band, and they've had a few different configurations in both 5, 4, and 3 parts. But they've sort of kind of created this thing where it's an open door where anyone can come back. But they went off, they did their own thing, they come back together. And I think that just, people are just gonna want to grow and change because we all want to find our own individual paths. And I think it's interesting. I think In Vogue has had their ups and downs with that, as have the Spice Girls, in terms of people who came together under business auspices, who became friends, but then wanted to, explore other things when they were ready. So
we say all that to say, Maxine, come on back.
Well, yes, exactly.
Well, and
right.
That's the really sort of like, I don't want to say it's interesting it's just something to note, is that there were like, obviously Terry had a moment, Dawn went and left the group, had a moment, but like, I always wonder about like Cindy, and whether Cindy and even Max back then, not now, but back then, if they really wanted those solo moments and they just didn't happen, or did they not seek them out because they were very sort of comfy where they were with In Vogue? Because you do find, like, for instance, with the Spice Girls, they all of them went and had solo moments. Like, that's not the case with In Vogue, and it very well could have been. Like, they could have at least, even if it wasn't successful, they could have tried. But we'll get into that, I think we'll get into that. I love a girl group. Oh, I love a girl group.
We'll have to do just a friendly Zoom just with wine or something and talk about girl groups and stuff and girl bands sometime soon. That would be nice.
I feel like there's a lot, especially I think you two, like when I hear you two talk in particular, I know which girl groups you all gravitate towards, and it's interesting because those are the ones probably that I know less about, but am intrigued about, but have yet to sort of dive into respective discographies. So like, I would be curious, like almost to even say like, if I'm gonna go like all the way in on Sister Sledge, for instance, like where do I begin, right? Like that kind of stuff. I think that'd be kind of fun because there's a lot of territory. So let's move on to the discussion for this episode. But first, you might be wondering, why in the hell are we doing an episode on these two groups? Well, both In Vogue and the Spice Girls represent pivotal moments in music history, each group shaping their respective eras in major ways. Our intention is to explore not just musical contrasts, but also the cultural impact both these groups had on their audiences.
While both groups were influential in their own right, they represented different facets of the evolving pop landscape, showcasing the diversity within the genre and leaving a lasting mark on music and popular culture.
By discussing and comparing these two groups, we aim to explore the nuances of their music, the messages they conveyed, and the ways in which they shaped and reflected the cultural zeitgeist of their times. Their influence extended beyond just music, but it also permeated fashion, feminism, and societal norms.
So today's discussion will also offer a unique opportunity to appreciate the evolution of girl groups in the music industry, highlighting the distinct paths taken by In Vogue and the Spice Girls while recognizing their enduring legacies.
In Vogue and the Spice Girls, two groups that emerged from different corners of the music world but shared a common genesis story steeped in determination and audacity. In Vogue, birthed from the 80s scene, came together as a quartet of powerhouse vocalists melding their harmonies into an R&B sensation.
Meanwhile, across the Atlantic in the mid-90s, the Spice Girls materialized as a phenomenon, a concoction of personalities, sporty, scary, baby, ginger, and posh, creating an infectious brand of pop that transcended borders. While In Vogue honed their craft through years of dedication and mutual passion for music, the Spice Girls burst onto the scene with a deliberate vision to champion girl power and individuality.
Despite distinct timelines, both groups navigated the trials of the music industry, reshaping perceptions of femininity and empowerment. So let's start with the Spice Girls. What is everyone's history with the group? Like, when did you first encounter the Spice Girls? What was it through their music? Did you see them on TV, merchandise, or what? I remember very distinctly the first time I saw them. It was on MTV. It was like the video was just on. I saw these girls. I remember a lime green tank top. I remember them running through a mansion. I was like, "What the fuck is this?" And then I was like, and it was like spanking new music. Do you remember when MTV used to put like spanking new music on the video?
All the good old days when they actually played music videos.
Right. And so I was watching. I was like, okay, as a black girl, I don't know. They don't dress alike. I don't know who's actually in this group because they're all running around. And then little did I know that would become like the biggest song of that year, and I would never stop hearing it.
Yeah. I think we should go in terms of like levels, because I think I'm in the middle here, and then Quentin I think is like take the cake. But I was obsessed with the Spice Girls. Similarly, I think I saw the video, or at least I can't remember when my first the moment I was introduced, but all I know is my fandom was steady and has continued to be pretty steady. And so, I mean, I'm talking went to the tour. I'm talking dragged my family to the film, Spice World film. I remember very distinctly, and this is how I know I had good ass parents, because I was a gay child, and I asked my mom and dad for the Posh Spice doll, and they drove me from here, which in rural North Carolina, where I'm at right this second, an hour away on Valentine's Day, just to make sure I got that Spice Girls doll. I had Posh Spice on my birthday cake one year. I was, as a kid, obsessed, because for me, I think there was this sort of this sort of bold, and it's weird to sort of as a young gay boy resonate so much with a girl power sort of message, but I knew that within that there was something for me. I just sort of, it wasn't blatant, but I sort of knew what it felt like. And what it felt like to me was a safer space. And so for them, or for me, they were sort of, especially because I was, a young kid. So that was the moment culturally, and they were the moment culturally. But for me, they were a big deal, even if they weren't successful. So I was a big fan.
Oh Lord, it's my turn. I always feel like I'm on the exhibit. So this is not hyperbolic to say that the Spice Girls literally shifted the entire trajectory of my life. Heard them in a traffic jam coming back from my father. Raced slot cars, which were little motorized cars on tracks. He was the only black man I knew who did this. He would go all around the state of Ohio, where I'm from, to do this. And we'd be the only black people there supporting my father. And he won trophies and infuriated all of these white men. So in one of these instances, we were on the border of Kentucky and Ohio, and Cincinnati's right there at that border between that and Covington. And as we were coming back, I remember hearing, I was 11 at the time, Wannabe, not knowing that they had already conquered the United Kingdom, Europe, and Asia. And I remember I was 11 and my father was like, oh, this seems like a fad, it won't last. And then, of course, they exploded in America. And I would see them a few months later, homesick from the Safety Patrol party in grade school.
Safety Patrol!
Yes. The Say You'll Be There video. But the record that changed everything for me was Spice Up Your Life. And there's a larger story that one day will go in my memoir. But I ended up buying Spice World, the album. My birthday was on March 9th, is on March 9th. And that was actually the day they released their third single from Spice World in the UK, Stop, which was their first single to not go in at number one. It broke their consecutive run of number one hits, came in at number two. It was a Jason Nevins remix of a Run DMC song from 83 called It's Like That kept them from the top spot. But I got the album on the 13th because in those days, the 9th was it was a Monday, and that's when new releases were released. In the UK, it was on a Monday, and we got them on Tuesdays at that time in America. But long story short, that was the very first album I bought. I played that record so much, it literally split in half. And so it was the first album I ever purchased with like my own money. And subsequently that opened a doorway, to British, popular music, popular culture, and just wider international music. And I stayed with the girls even as they retreated from our shores. And that was with the advent of the advancement of internet. So I could stay with them. And so I followed them through all of their different changes as a group and solo acts. And I've been an active fan. It'll be 26 years, March 9th this year.
I feel like you need like something else beyond fan. Like, I don't know. There's like...
So, I mean, they're the reason that I wanted to sort of I ended up becoming a music writer, journalist, or critic. I cannot overstate just how, like you said, I think finding myself, they represented other to me, female, queer, even if I think even other ethnicities and things could find themselves in a group because they just represented, they were a safe space it was an intersection of just other and diversity at a time when you weren't using those words to say that, but they didn't have to. They just they represented it in the way they conducted and comported themselves. And even when they went off on their individual adventures, they still carried that spark in them. So it was never a nostalgia trip for me. And that's not knocking anyone who's gotten back into them for that reason. But I always stayed interested because their journeys as women and as creatives fascinated me. I had a chance to meet Jerry Halliwell last October when she was promoting her book, Rosie Frost and the Falcon Queen. And it meant so much to me to tell her just what a great songwriter she was and how amazing she was just as an artist. And so the whole reason that I write about music today, the reason I have such a broad love of popular music is because of them. And I have so much respect for them as songwriters, as singers, as performers, and just as human beings. I think they are just the knees bees. So viva la Spice.
Well, I didn't know we were giving our full Spice Girls portfolio because
roll it out, JP.
And just this is my shameless plug. You can purchase Record Redux Spice Girls, the second edition, on Amazon. It's my book, which is an entire detailed discography guide of everything they've done as a group and individually. But that's the abridged story. There's so much stuff I've left out. There's tons and tons and tons and tons of things that I can include, but we don't have time for all that today. And this isn't about me. So
I do want to include that I did go out and buy their first 2 albums. I did go see their movie.
What?
And I did get their
I don't know why that surprises
their
me, JP.
pay-per-view specials. I think I might still have it on VHS, and I recorded it. Like back in the day, you could put the VHS in and press record.
Oh, yes.
My mother, it was so crazy
Pay-per-view.
because my mother, I think back then it may have been like $25 or something to pay per view the concert. And I was like, Mom, please. And she actually she actually did it.
I love it.
And so I used to live, and I remember they had these little gold.
These mamas be knowing.
He was like, "Here, child, go ahead." And I remember I used to tape it and watch it all the time. I taped it and watched it all the time, and I just remember they had like the gold little 2-piece sets. Well, some of them were like a little 2-piece. I'm sure one of them had like the one. And I remember they did 2 become 1, and they had this like little funky breakdown at the end. I used to give my life to that, like every day after school. But yes, I do have fond Spice Girl memories. I mean, I stopped around the 3rd album, but I was living for 2 albums.
And I actually think you'll really like. I think you should revisit the 3rd one, but we'll get there.
Which Spice Girl resonated with you the most? Did you have a favorite member of the group, and if so, why did they stand out to you? If it's all right, I'd like to answer this one first.
Yeah, go for it.
So in the beginning, I was probably drawn to Melanie C because there was a quiet intensity about her that I loved. Those eyes, particularly in the Too Much video, she just was I loved her. But now I could never pick a favorite because I love all 5 of them equally. They all represent something unique. And I think that's something that has helped them be singular as a group in terms of their appeal as a unit and their ability to eventually then later break off and pursue other individual pursuits and vocations they wanted to pursue.
For me, it was always Mel B. Like, I just thought she was pretty. I mean, she was black, so that's I was just naturally drawn to her. But to this day, it's still her. And I guess I also love women with like deeper voices. I love like a Khalees. You know, I like a little funkier, lower situation. Yeah, so it was Mel B for me.
It began, it remained, it will always be Victoria Beckham. Just, I don't know why. I think I know why. It was just always like first of all, people always love to say that she's the one that, like, she's the worst singer of the group. I will argue against that, but that's also not the point of this podcast. But I just always found her to be like, she embodied everything that I kind of wanted to be, which was like the like not smiling, cool, sexy, like girl in the corner who didn't give a fuck. So like that was always like, it was always her. It was always her. And when she showed up, she showed up. And when she danced, she danced. And when she sang, it was cute. So like, I always appreciated her. And I just always thought that for all of them to be so individual, she would stand out the most in like small ways. So like, I just always loved the fact that, like, you know, the girls would all be smiling and they'd be so joyful and she would be like pouting in the corner. I just thought that was so cool. So cool. So yeah, it's always Posh for me.
So, well, do you think In Vogue had distinctive members similar to the Spice Girls? Where you could ask someone like, which In Vogue member resonated the most with you? Or which one was your favorite? Or do you think they weren't distinct enough in their individuality in the group?
It's like, it's kind of like two sides of the same coin. Is that the phrase? Like, I think that there are ways in which In Vogue does have distinctive members. I think In Vogue was a group that was designed to work as a unit, like, and feel cohesive across look and sort of singing style and all the things. But there are some real significant differences between the ladies that like just naturally emerge that make them certainly more individual, and then therefore make it easier to sort of be like, that's my girl. So like, I think in the beginning that was harder to do, but certainly by like EV3 and on, it was really easy to sort of find a member that resonated. And I think Funky Divas like was where they were starting to play around with some of that. So like, yeah, I always found it to be kind of, I felt the strength of In Vogue was how cohesive they were, and how in the beginning, especially, they sort of branded them similar, like that they sort of felt like same outfit, same whatever. But like, I sort of knew when I heard the music that there were some distinctive voices and members there.
And I was going to say, I think people definitely had their favorites. Like, my uncle is 60 years old, and to this day, he knows their names. He's like, Cindy, the light one. That's my favorite. Like, I think people who were there and like, my uncle is like very much a straight man, like not really into music more than like, you know, the casual listener who just, you know, listens to the radio or whatever. And like, he knew those women by names, and like, he had a thing for Cindy. I think a lot of people just kind of had their favorites for whatever reason. Because the thing about In Vogue, like, they all look different. They all had very different aesthetics. Even if they were dressed similarly, it was something about them. They just had an aura. Like, they all had their own individual thing. Like, which is hard to come by, like, where you can all be dressed alike and you can still see very much like their individual personalities in a lot of ways. Like, right. Maybe it's how, you know, Don had an asymmetrical bob at one point, or maybe, you know what I'm saying, like Maxine would do a little shortcut, like whatever it was. I definitely think it resonated in their own way without going about it in the same way that the Spice Girls did.
I think the mark of any group is it's about for however many individuals coming together to become a whole or one unit.
There's a two become one pun there. But anyway.
Now, I mean, I think it's important to delineate this. I think the thing with it is that there have always been, especially if they're as a part of youth culture with groups, they've always sort of had the members that you're supposed to know. I think some groups have had more expressive or outgoing members than others, or de facto lead singers. And Vogue was similar to the Spice Girls in that there was not a lead singer or lead figure. It was about people coming together. Now, you could argue that there was a figure that might draw more attention on occasion than some of the others. So in that respect, I think you would have Dawn and Jerry mirror each other because they sometimes could be the focal point of the public. I'm reminded of the Oh My God lyric from A Tribe Called Quest from Midnight Marauders, where the late Five Dog shouts out about his crush about Dawn from In Vogue, which is not to say that Terry, Maxine, and Cindy were any less more beautiful. She just happened to be that focal point, but In Vogue's talent did not rest solely on her shoulders, and it was the same for Jerry. Jerry was a very dynamic figure. She had her own talent and different things that she brought to the group, but it wasn't only about her. I think what makes the Spice Girls different than In Vogue is that they leaned into their individual personas and really embrace those elements. That wasn't sort of it wasn't an affectation. These were genuinely personality traits that were theirs. They got their names from the Top of the Pops magazine. Peter Lorraine, I believe, did the feature. I think it was, and that's how they got the names. And they just decided to keep them kind of early on in their career when they were breaking in the UK. But I think In Vogue, that classic four-piece silhouette in particular. I remember as a kid growing up that everyone had someone from In Vogue that they liked. I kind of tended to be a toss-up between Cindy and Terry. I remember Terry, when I was younger, seeing her in the first time in the Hold On video because she's the one who's given the most intense face in the video. I think there's a great shot where the camera pans out right after they come out of the second verse and doing the chorus, and Terry, she's giving it to the camera. She's giving it to you. But I like Cindy because Cindy had that kind of broad pop voice that I liked. Not that the other ones being soulful were a problem, but I liked that she could sort of do different things. I remember when I interviewed her, when she said that she liked Barbra Streisand, that was one of the people she liked. I wasn't surprised at all.
That makes a lot of sense.
I think she's into theater too. So I think that, she's into that kind of stuff, Broadway and different things. So yeah, Cindy would probably like a toss between Cindy and Terry would probably be my favorite, now. And then, but yeah, I just think, they had their own personalities. I think they came across, I think it's just, it wasn't in the same sort of, way, but that's not to diminish with the Spice Girls, how they did it. I think some people want to kind of reduce them to cartoon characters. And I think there was a bit more to them than just that. And I think that, as they went along, how they expressed themselves would take on richer dimensions. And, I think that would prove to be, challenging for others and for others, not so much, but it just depends on how you look at it.
So we're going to take this next sort of question both ways. So first, what impact did the Spice Girls have on your perception of girl power and empowerment? And did that message influence you in any sort of significant way? And then on the flip side, similarly, how did In Vogue also sort of have that same impact on your perception of girl power and empowerment? And how did that show up?
I mean, I'm not a girl, so I didn't really have, I didn't resonate to them in that, it didn't resonate with me in that way, of girl power. I mean, I thought it was cool. It was their songs were very, empowering, sure, but I don't think that is why I liked them at the time. But if I just think about it, I mean, I think In Vogue and the Spice Girls both had, female empowering anthems, I guess. But I never think about their music in that way for that reason, because, I'm not looking for girl power per se. But I mean, I can acknowledge that they both had anthems that really championed women. I hope that sounds right.
I mean, for me, I there was this weird sort of messiness of girl power, and I mentioned this earlier. I'm not a girl. I don't identify as a girl. So, but somehow it still sort of resonated with me. And I think that was just because I was really sort of in tune with my queerness. And so I was like, okay, yeah, this is for me anyway. And so, but what was interesting about the songs were that there was a diversity of sort of messages that didn't sort of heavily rely on relationships and love. And so I sort of knew that there was something there as well that was like poking at that. Like, it ain't always got to be about, you know, the traditional sort of gender norm expectations. And so I knew something was percolating there that felt different than a lot of other groups in terms of like the sort of empowerment message. Like, I was like, who is being empowered here? I was like, because I'm feeling empowered, and this wasn't written with me in mind in particular.
I think for me, like, it's just building off of what you said, Josh. I think really, like I said, they were sort of an intersection or nexus of other. I think, I mean, obviously, you know, being women, that was probably initially their primary audience, but they never explicitly said that other people were not welcome in the fold. As long as you respected their otherness as women, I think that's where you could bring in different elements. And I think it's important to mention that Mel B she's a biracial woman. There were so many trails and things that she blazed in terms of being where she was when she was in that group at that time. I think she was arguably the most visible Black British woman in the world for about a good 3.5 year span, almost 4. And that's saying something. I mention that because that it makes people feel like they can belong. So whether you're Black, queer, male, female, as long as you respect just general otherness, you're welcome to join their gang. And I think that appealed to people. And then obviously with any sort of music in the popular music sphere, we're projecting our experiences onto it. And I think that goes the same for In Vogue. I think it was the same thing with them. I think in particular when they did Free Your Mind, I think the reason that hit the way it did was because at that point you weren't supposed to see Black groups doing those kind of records. I mean, granted, we had Janet Jackson do Black Cat, you know, you'd had, you know, Michael do what he was doing and other artists through the years. I mean, and I'd say probably one of the other Black girl groups to sort of do that again, where they're Oakland Four Mothers, the Pointer Sisters, who, you know, were doing country music at one point, you know, in the early 70s. But when In Vogue did Free Your Mind, I think the reason that resonated with wider audiences without alienating their core Black audience and resonated with men could enjoy it, but it was also something that women felt empowered by, is that again, it was about other. And when and embracing the things that were different, and that embracing that difference didn't diminish what you were from. And I think, what is that line that Maxine sings? I might date another race or color. It doesn't mean I don't like my strong Black brother. You can possess multitudes. And I think both In Vogue and the Spice Girls represented that. And in many respects, the Spice Girls gleaned that from In Vogue, who were their foremothers and what they taught them. And I think the Spice Girls were able to take what In Vogue sort of put out on the table and took it to the next step. So it's all about that connectivity and sort of standing on each other's shoulders and supporting otherness and uniqueness and diversity. And not just as buzzwords, but as real things, quantitative things and qualitative things that matter. I think both groups did that. And they're pretty much, I'd say, neck and neck in that respect.
Let me ask you this. Do you guys think like the appeal of like an In Vogue, because I always just assumed that like queer little boys, gay little boys, whatever, like female artists just because of the fabulousness of it all, like because of the, you know, the glamour and the, you know, everything that comes along with the female artist. But do you think with the Spice Girls or with In Vogue, the allure had more to do with the messaging, or was it just the overall aesthetic? If that makes, I think
one leads to the other. Because I think the surface, I remember someone making this sort of backhanded comment about Beyonce once, like, oh, she's gutter feminism. And I kind of cringed at that. I said, well, if Beyonce, did you say gutter feminism? Someone said that about Beyonce to me, and I was really offended by that. But I said, you know, because they used to make that comment about the Spice Girls, that it was bimbofied feminism. Mm-hmm. And I said, and people would also say this, and I've said this about in the defense of the Spice Girls in terms of that perspective of them, that if Beyonce and what she was communicating in a more, what I wouldn't call it gutter, I'd say it's a more maybe direct feminism, or a more streamlined feminism can sort of hook that person and link them into having self-esteem about themselves and then send them out on their way to sort of find that for themselves, then they've accomplished their mission. So the aesthetic leads you to the substance. So you can have style and substance in the same thing. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. And I think that was something that both In Vogue and the Spice Girls they offered a masterclass in. If you listen to something like Hold On, it comes across as lyrically, it's a very submissive love song. Hold on to your love. You're sort of sublimating yourself, but the way it's delivered, both vocally and visually, it's empowering. And it doesn't come across as a submissive song. And I think, the Spice Girls represented that you could wear sneakers, you could wear heels, you could wear bustiers, tracksuits, whatever. And you could be just as smart and sexy or whatever, I think Victoria said it best, girl power is just about being sure of yourself, and just, what did she say? How did she phrase it? About having a good time. And if you like, short skirts and heels, be proud and sure of yourself. I'm kind of paraphrasing there, but that's really what it is. Just sort of defining what that needs to be for yourself. But to your point, JP, I think it's a little bit of both. I know for me, especially with the Spice Girls, as I began to enter like my teen years, and even, prior to that with most songs, I wanted songs that reflected what I was feeling inside. So if I was attracted to a boy, for me, it made sense to sing along to a song about those feelings, because it mirrored what was happening inside of me in terms of the attraction I held for a guy.
It's interesting. Like I really never really thought about if their empowerment themes attracted me or not. But now that I talk about it, like I remember being obsessed with like Free Your Mind and just how powerful and badass they looked in the videos, and even with the Spice Girls, like Spice Up Your Life. I remember I was obsessed with that song, and
they're call to arms. That's what they're call to arms songs. And they're both very strong. And what's interesting, both of those videos have very strong, almost sort of black gothic kind of punkish. I say for In Vogue more Afro punk, for the Spice Girls kind of more sci-fi in the respective videos. They're both definitive visual experiences as much as they are sonic or lyrical.
I will say though that like for me, and there was something like when I think about traditional, quote unquote, traditional femininity, I thought that like In Vogue did a really interesting job of leveraging the feminine in a way to move the message forward pretty uniformly, in a way that the Spice Girls sort of kind of disrupted the feminine to me. Like, I think when you had the presence of like Sporty Spice and then like Scary Spice, and you were playing around with like versions of femininity that In Vogue didn't necessarily do. Because my one sort of critique about In Vogue in that conversation of aesthetic is hearing in recent interviews, and I think maybe Frank Gatson said it, but like that In Vogue was like a classy way to approach, like there was this sort of like, it felt a bit like we're classier than what was happening elsewhere in the sort of like music industry with women. And so that they took great pride in being a classy, we're not showing off all of our bodies kind of way. And I don't think that that's held up with time when that sort of talking point comes up over and over again. Because I think it came up even in that Frank Gatson when he did the In Vogue podcast that they did a couple of years ago. So like the aesthetic is super important to me for both groups, in a less so than like the message and the music, but like the aesthetic playing such a big role. They had two very different sort of entry points that I do think sort of arrive at the same message, but I do think that the Spice Girls aesthetic and their approach has held up over time, which is why they're still so culturally important right now. Whereas I think that we've sort of said, hey, you can do the In Vogue thing aesthetically, but also there's all these other ways to be feminine, or there's all these other ways to be empowered that don't rely on a dress and heels. So I don't know. They're kind of complicated to me.
Well, I think the Spice Girls, because it's interesting, when Little Mix was under fire a few years ago for being oversexed, they attempted, when they interviewed Melanie C, to have her sort of shame them. And she said, I'm not going to do that, because they are owning, they're autonomous. They're owning they have agency just as we did. And people weren't kind to us when we were out. People would call the Spice Girls bimbos and everything else, particularly Jerry and Victoria would get it. They were particularly cruel to Victoria for a time. But I think the Spice Girls, like you said, to build on your point, the reason that they are, I wouldn't say relevant, because I think each girl group or girl band represents different periods in our popular cultural consciousness. But the Spice Girls sort of find this perfect alchemy, or this balance, where they sit between what is considered classy for some people, and then also they are disruptive, or almost, I think another word I would use is I guess disruptive is a good one. There's another term I want to use on the tip of my tongue, but I can't think of it. But I think they sort of sit in that space. They're not undersexed, but they're not oversexed. Not saying that. I'm just using those as just sort of poles. They kind of come in the middle. They were able to find that they could be sexy, but then at the same time, they weren't afraid to dress uniformly.
Wear suits.
Yeah. And it's interesting, because within the pop space, there are some fans who would get down on the girls at different points when their image began to shift. Because, you had when they first started, they kind of had what I call the round the way girl aesthetic. Boy George, God, I love him, once called them council estate glamour, which was sort of a backhanded compliment. And then they sort of graduated to the more popular cultural glamazon thing that we see now, primarily. And then as they matured, right before Jerry exited and afterwards, their image continued to refine and get more mature. It was still unique, but it wasn't maybe as gauche or garish. And then there were some fans who rejected that. They didn't want them to mature. They didn't want them to evolve. And that, for me, as someone who was actively following them, that was depressing, because there was such an interesting part of that story when they continued to go and find themselves as a four-piece and then later on their own. They didn't just want to be cardboard cutout caricatures, so I think there's limitations,
That's what, to connect that to In Vogue, I think that's interesting, because I feel like there was also, I don't know that I've sort of have documentation that says this, but like, I feel like the general vibe, especially around the EV3 era, was like that they were also kind of playing too aggressively with an image that was not what people wanted from them. And so specifically I do know that there was that backlash to the Whatever video where folks felt like it was too left. And I think that was, they were still hella feminine, and they were still giving lots of like glamour in a way, but it was so different from what they had done before. And so, but that's probably why, like, what you're speaking about happened in the span of 4 years, basically. Like, whereas In Vogue had sort of maintained this sort of like similar vibe of aesthetic. It was, gowns or something. And like, so they were the fashion girls. And so, they quickly went back to it with Masterpiece Theater. Like they were like, no, we're not gonna carry that through. Like, we're back to jewel tones and dresses. So
I think, the Spice Girls had their own thing with that last reunion tour they did in 2019. The only person who I felt carried through, they didn't look terrible. The first reunion I liked more, because I felt the Roberto Cavalli costumes were about moving their classic aesthetic forward. With the Spice World 2019 reunion tour, which was their first without Victoria and their second as a four-piece, it almost felt like they were trying to make it just for it leaned on the nostalgia, with the exception of Jerry.
Oh, yeah.
With the exception of Jerry. Jerry was the only one who I felt kept it moving forward, because
that's not who she is.
Well, no, it is. I think it's just a different version of it. Like when she walked out in that huge floor length Brit Union Jack ball gown, I remember my breath just took my breath away. I watched she spun around in that sucker. I was like, oh God. Oh, I can't believe it.
And a lot of people were like, what is she doing?
They didn't like that she was leaning more into her British sort of nationalist element, which has always been there from the beginning. But she's talked about her whole journey, because now, she wears a lot of white. And that's a whole thing now for her. And this is interesting, like this image and how those things manifest and how we deal with that. But yeah, we go on about that. That's with both groups. I love EV3. That's my favorite In Vogue album. So the Spice Girls and In Vogue, that third record was a pivotal moment for both groups. And they both had pros and cons coming into that in terms of commercial and creative and critical things that they were traversing at that time.
What memories or moments do you associate with the Spice Girls? Are there any particular songs or performances or cultural phenomena tied to your experience with the group?
Again, I could go on and on, so I'm going to let you two go first.
Well, I remember specifically, because I used to tape everything back in the day on VHS. I remember having their Billboard Awards performance of Spice Up Your Life. And I remember living for Mel B's. She had like this brown, if I recall, was it like a leopard suit? And it looked like a bra on underneath. And some pants. And I remember her button came open and like, because they were lip syncing, and so I remember she was like trying to button up her coat, and like her voice is playing. It was like I hear her, but her hands are down, and the mic is down. So that was funny. I also remember like the VMAs when they did "Say You'll Be There,"
which was actually one of their first live performances pre-Istanbul. Before that show,
I remember that.
And the mics are on at that performance.
Yes, they were. I remember they were singing
on,
live.
yeah.
And I remember that, like, did they boo them a little bit at one point?
No, you're thinking of what happened in Spain when they were promoting Spice World and they had an issue with the press. And it was after they had fired Simon Fuller, and they wouldn't come out at a certain time because they had asked for the press to respect a request of theirs, and they didn't. So when they came out to perform, they got booed by the press junket at the time. But they made it through that. I mean, they ended up cheering for them at the end because, you know, bump those fools. But,
But the other thing, the memory I have, I used to sit up on my phone and call the radio station and request "Say You'll Be There." Like, that is so crazy to me. Like, I really used to call all the time and request that song. Like, back when I guess the radio would play what you asked them to play. Because "Say You'll Be There" was, I loved that song because it felt like it had a little bit of like R&B flair to it. And I was like, because Spice Girls kind of, when Wannabe came out, it seemed like they were going to be like a one-hit wonder. And then when I heard "Say You'll Be There," I was like, oh, they have another one. And I think that's probably when I got the CD. And I think that really made me a fan. "Say You'll Be There," because that was like a really good song.
I will say that also, yeah, "Say You'll Be There" was the moment for me. Like, "Wannabe" was like an introduction, and I get why it was the sort of massive hit it was, but like, if I was to really like sort of look at the singles that I want to hear by the Spice Girls, "Wannabe's" actually not that high for me. Partly because Victoria's not really like, she doesn't have a moment on there. She doesn't have a vocal moment like by herself.
She's just doing the unison, the chorus.
Right. But "Say You'll Be There" is, that's when I was like, oh, like it's kind of funky. Like
this is a real group. Like this.
And Victoria makes the pre-chorus of the song. Victoria's bit is what makes the song.
It's so cool, and then the VMA performance really sold it for me because that was I was like, oh, we're giving live band. Oh, we're giving vocals that are live. the VMAs, it was particularly that year, were so like diverse. Like that was just a really bonkers. Like, I mean, they closed with Marilyn Manson that year. Like it was just a really sort of like I remember being terrified of Marilyn
Wasn't that the Ladies' Night performance too? I
think the Ladies' Night performance was there. I think Fiona Apple was really big that year. So it was kind of giving a lot of different kind of sounds, which is what I love about the 90s, in particular the late 90s. And so to have them there felt like it legitimized them in a way that a lot of other acts didn't get that sort of like that platform to do. So like that sticks out as a really big performance for me in terms of the introduction to them. I think I'll talk about Holler at length, but I think that like Holler is a big moment for me as well because it really solidified them as like what I would consider like, that's when they were like, I was like, oh, they are like, if they kept with this thing, this is the lane. So Holler is a really big moment for me too. And then there's lots of things in between, but I think the music videos are to be spoken about at length because I think they really supported the music in a way that I don't know that a lot of artists could say that they did the same amount of work for the songs as the Spice Girls music videos did for their songs. So there's just a lot of memories, moments, all the things.
I'm going to do two. First time I remember just buying Spice World, the album, and that gorgeous Christopher Solder art, that photography. It's on my shower curtain. I've got I remember taking that CD out of the tray liner, and I had just never seen anything like that before in my life. They were just everything. Being this weird black queer kid in the Midwest, I just like by this point I had seen them, but actually seeing them not just on a TV or on a magazine on the stand at the grocery store, like holding it in my hands, it was just, it was unique. So I remember taking the CD out of the tray liner. I'll never forget seeing that image of them, just fantastic. With Victoria with the matching black bra, socks, and heels, and then the beige shirt on top. But the other would be when I saw them on the reunion tour, their first one. I went to Long Island to see them, February 6th of 2008, or February, yeah. Left side of the Coliseum, or left side of the catwalk, Nassau Coliseum. And I remember when they did some of their solo stuff, and Emma was getting ready to do Maybe, which is the second single from her gold-selling second solo album, Free Me, 20 years next month. And there was this really weird, dull roar of people in the audience who knew it. And I remember this really like snooty girl behind me, like, what is this? And she's like, I don't know this. And I was like, silence. I was like, this is Maybe. I've waited my whole life for this. Shut up. I want to see this woman give me this performance. Shut up. And she didn't say nothing else the whole show. And I have no regrets because Emma came out there in that black and white with those go-go boots and gave me 100%, 10% live vocal and gave a fantastic performance. And you have to understand, like, that was when I heard that song in the fall of 2003, my freshman year of college. This is pre-YouTube. So to get those music videos, unless you had the box, like a really expensive international cable, you had to rip those videos from the Spice Girls fan board. So I had like women to get the digital rip of that music video. So, oh God, there was a discipline to follow those ladies and to get those records. And I paid $35 for that album. It was actually the single most expensive CD, Emma's second album, that I owned for years. Probably like at least 6 or 7 years.
I just have to pull something from what you just said that I think applies to both groups. And I think applies largely to like why groups and artists are so beloved, especially when I think in our youth, is that it took work to be a fan, like a really big fan. Like, you know, when we talk about In Vogue craze, or we talk about like what it was like to be on the Spice, like Spice Girls forums and all of the, I remember that.
Right. It yes, heaven and hell, but it was an interesting space.
Wow.
Yeah.
But like, you had to really work to like keep up with stuff, especially when like, the internet was just sort of in its infancy, or it was really sort of, everybody didn't have the internet because access to the internet was something that was, costly and privileged. And for a lot of people, it still is, let's be clear. But like, hanging out in forums and spending your free time like clicking and trying to like see the latest news that you couldn't get because you couldn't Google it or, whatever. It made you a different kind of fan. And I think that's why like podcasts like these still sort of stick, because these, we worked at liking these things and keeping these things. So, yeah.
Well, my biggest takeaway from that is that Quentin was a bully at a Spice Girls concert.
I paid my dues. Like, you understand? Like it was my time. It was, what is it from the Jacksons? It's Tito time. It was Tito time in that moment for me. Because I wasn't able to see them when they came in the States the first time, which is why it was so emotional when I saw Jerry in Cincinnati, 30 minutes from my childhood home, 15 minutes from my first apartment there. Like, it just, the synchronicity, I still haven't even processed that. I still haven't wrapped my mind around meeting that woman in person. I don't know if I ever will.
It was a really lovely moment to see that on the timeline. I was like, Quentin is either like freaking out, or is cool, calm, and collected, and is going to freak out about it later.
It's coming. I think there will be a delayed reaction in the summer, I predict. But
Wait, I just have to say one more thing. I remember after Spice Up Your Life came out, Too Much came out. I was like, they've done it again.
That's a great song. And shameful.
I was like, they have done it. And I remember they had a special on the UPN.
Brandy hosted it.
Yes, and they played the video. They debuted the Too Much video. I was there. I was there. I was seated. I'm sure it's still on VHS somewhere in like a box. But
is that on YouTube? I would love to rewatch that.
I remember that Too Much. I was obsessed with that song. I still have the CD single.
It actually
Too Much
did.
And Stop.
It did a great job in the. It was the biggest. It was the biggest successful single in America from that album, because the chart run for those singles was 16, 9, and it was 18, 6, number 18 for Spice Up Your Life, number 9 for Too Much, number 16 for Stop.
Too Much was a vibe. I was like, I love how both their second singles from the first and second album both had like gave me like a little R&B-ish vibe.
There's the doo-wop, and it annoys me to no end. I'm not a Grammy slut, but the fact that they never acknowledge some of those singles, like Say You'll Be There, To Become One, songs that were great compositions, and this is no disrespect to Max Martin or Britney or NSYNC, but the fact that records like Gone and stuff like that were able to get nods, goes through me.
I think it just shows though I think the Grammys, they have progressed year after year with because like I can't imagine a world like 20 years ago where someone like Taylor Swift would have had like an album of the year. You know what I mean? Like I noticed like as the years go on, they get less and less stuffy about certain things.
Yeah,
like now they go out of their way. They go out of their way to recognize the commercially viable artists, because they realize that if they don't if they aren't recognized, then people aren't going to tune in. You know, if like you have the biggest album of the year, like in sales, is not nominated for album of the year, it like takes away some credibility in the eyes of the audience, at least.
Have your feelings or appreciation for the Spice Girls and In Vogue changed over time? Do you view their music or message differently now compared to when you first encountered them?
I still listen like to In Vogue, like they're new artists. Like they're always in my year end. They're always like within the top 10 of my most listened to artists. So I don't view their music differently. I view it the same. I feel like it's just quality music. It's music that I really, really enjoy. The Spice Girls, I don't listen to the Spice Girls as much, but I do. It's like certain songs like Stop. I really love Stop now, which I didn't love as much then. Like it was cute then, but I like Stop a whole lot more now than I did then, which is weird. To Become One, I listened to that a lot. Too Much was a song that I loved when it came out. I really don't like it as much now. It's really weird. I don't know what it is, but like there's certain songs like Who Do You Think You Are, I love. I've always loved that record. If You Can't Dance, like there are a lot of songs from them that I do kind of enjoy, but I would say most of their songs do hold up really well for me, which is kind of surprising.
For me, yeah, I think I agree. Like my appreciation has only really grown, I think, for both since my introduction. So I love the thing I love about getting older is going back to things that I really loved when I was younger and realizing that they were way deeper than the instant gratification I got from like a catchy hook and a really cool music video. And so when we talked about EV3 on however many episodes ago, and there was, I think JP, you might have said it. I think I've said it. Somebody like revisiting that album in particular is like really interesting now, because there are things that I probably had dismissed about it then for the same reasons of like, I didn't think the hook was catchy enough, or I didn't think it was singable enough, or I thought it was boring sounding or whatever. That now I'm like, oh, I kind of fuck with that. So like, it's just interesting, I think, as a listener growing older and things resonating differently because you're looking for things differently in the music.
But you know what I was wondering though? because I feel the same way, like about EV3 and everything. But I was wondering, is it because In Vogue is not currently putting anything out, so it's making me go back and search for things? You know what I mean?
It
like,
could be.
It's very much like I'm starved for them, so it's like, okay, I'm just gonna read.
I'm gonna go look at it differently, right?
Yeah,
right.
and so it made me kind of deep dive, because I hated EV3 for the most part, but now it's like I'm listening to like Sitting by Heaven's Door, like it just came out, and I'm like, what is this? Like, it's so weird. Like an album can be 20 years old, and I'm rediscovering things that I didn't like. Even with the Spice Girls' third album, I didn't buy that album because at that time when that album came out, it was very much like the Napster era for me, and so I was like just downloading everything at that point. I really stopped buying CDs like that, but I didn't really care for that album initially. But since then, I've gone back, and there are like several songs from the third album that I really like. Like, I mean, I always liked Holla though. I really always loved that song. But the rest of the album I really wasn't into. But like Wasting My Time is like, that's my jam.
That's a great one. I like Weekend Love and Oxygen. Oxygen's really pretty. And Love Lead the Way is really finally finding its wings. I think that's a song that it really people are tapping into.
That's one I can't. The wings are not over here. I just can't. Tell me why it's a bop too.
A little overproduced. But what I like about that production is Rodney took a vocal tick from Victoria and he sews it into the track. So when the thing pulls back, you hear her kind of breathing on the track. It's an interesting little loop that he does. Emma does really well. That's a great performance for Emma, and it was great live. It was great on that tour live, and it was something I think that you could tell it moved them emotionally at the time. But I have a lot of love for the third album, and that was an interesting and difficult time. I walked in a snowstorm to buy that record after school in high school. But in terms of, to answer the question, for me, they are the reason I analyze music and go back and listen to things and rediscover again and again. And because I've followed through their journey in a linear way, so I got to hear the solo records that were coming prior to them doing Forever. So you can see the line that they were sort of going on and toward. So there are things I've warmed to. Like, I wasn't really a big fan of Melanie C's third solo record, Beautiful Intentions, at the time. I was 20 when that record came out. I bought it because it's the girls, but it wasn't something I appreciated then. I have more appreciation for it now. And I think there are different things like that. I really have a lot of appreciation for Mel B's record now because of the audacity, the amount of talent she had on that album in one space was ridiculous. Teddy Riley, Jammin' Lewis, the Dark Child Clique,
feels so good.
Timbaland. Wow. It's uneven in spots. There are some things about it, but on the whole, it's a very interesting record. It's unfortunate that there was no infrastructure for her to promote that record, because how do you promote a Black woman who's primarily gained her prominence off the back of white listeners and sort of reverse engineer this sort of contemporary Black album? That was a conundrum at the time. Even though she just
promote her as like a new Black artist, like
it wasn't that simple. And that's the thing. All of this stuff is in my book, shameless plug. And I've done a few standalone write-ups on Mel B. But I say all that to say, I mean, they and In Vogue. I mean, the thing with In Vogue was I didn't start buying In Vogue's records until 2007. So for me, I loved them as when I was younger, and then went back and was like, wow, these records are really good. They've held up. And I discovered all the other stuff they had done, I knew Riddle, but I discovered the rest of Masterpiece Theater, Soulflower, which I was obsessed with Soulflower when I bought that record when I was in college. It was all new to me. And I think their stuff has held up well, and I think they have a very underrated canon, actually. I think In Vogue is appreciated as a catalog artist. They have a very solid catalog. But the Spice Girls, like I said, they have a very rich catalog, especially when you pair the 3 group albums with all of the solo albums. It's almost 20 albums plus worth of material. It's really incredible. So
I just want to know, maybe I should read it in the book, but why don't they do another album?
You have to read the book. It's a whole thing. It's the thing they've done some new music. They did do 2 new songs on their best of that were very interesting. Headlines, Friendship Never Ends, and Voodoo. And there was Song for Her. That's a whole other separate conversation. But yeah.
Gem. Or whatever it was called.
Yes. That was kind of the thing about that was sad was there was a lot going on. Mel B was in that very abusive marriage that was nearing its end. I think that had caused some tension there. And thankfully she's out of that now. And the cool thing about that was she does a lot of charitable work for women's aid stuff for domestic violence. And she received an OBE award from now new Prince of Wales, Prince William. And Victoria Beckham dressed her and her mother for that event.
I just read that Victoria's dress made her wedding dress.
Yeah. Yes. Mel B's dress.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, her new one.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the old school, her very first one when she married her first husband.
The new one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see. Yeah, I have to tell you, it's an interesting story. That whole and that's why I always say, never say never, because I never thought I'd live to see the day Jerry doing like the kind of the white lady kind of dance to holler on stage when they did that reunion. I never thought I'd live to see that, because when they did that, when I saw them, Jerry exits the stage and they do that as a 4-piece.
I always slight detour from there. I always thought that's how that's how I imagine the sort of like playing around with an In Vogue like EV5 reunion to be, is that they play around with some of that kind of like staging to be like to give Rona like an entry and give Dawn an outro and tell the story of the group.
Mm-hmm, like that's what they did.
Well, I mean, Rona would never be on stage.
Oh, shut up.
She would come out singing a Rocket and go on.
Which is fine. I think that but what that does is it gives people the gratification from seeing the original lineup, but it also gives these moments where like perhaps there's segments of the catalog that might be 4-piece original that they still do with like all 5 or something.
Well,
but like you still move
Goodbye.
through it.
She joins them on stage at that first reunion at the end of Let Love Lead the Way, and then it goes into Goodbye, and she sings Goodbye with them.
Right. So it's telling a story. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And I love that. And I wish that In Vogue would sort of get it together and do something similar, because that could be really fun. But I think it also, I'm not sure that kind of narrative is what the general population cares about, to be quite honest, because they're like the Spice Girls, like Jerry leaving was such a worldwide event when that happened. I don't know that like the nuances of that for In Vogue, but for like a super fan, I think that like that would be so cool to see similar approaches.
I think if they tell the story in an interesting way, it'll be gripping for casual and devoted. It's all in how they choose to tell it. If anything, I think that might actually revive life into the group. Not that they're not living now, but it'll help bring, I think, a more dimension.
I need a refresh. But speaking of Goodbye, I don't think I've ever said this, but sometimes that song makes me cry.
It is a very
heavy song. Maybe their winter song, their Christmas songs do something to me, but that song is just so beautiful. I've listened to that song often, and like I still have that CD single as well, and it's something about it. It really touches me in some kind of way. I don't know why. Like, it's not even like I've lost people like that. It's just such a sad song.
It's a universal concept of beginnings and endings. And I think that's something that at the core everyone can relate to, and kind of coming out of that beginning and endings with love in your heart for yourself and for the people that you care about. That's how I've always seen that song.
You said that was done before Jerry left, so you said she's on it?
No.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. No. You said on the tour.
So, yeah, when they, on the Return of the Spice Girls tour. Now, the rumor was at the time when they were beginning work on the tentatively for what would become the third record, that Jerry had contributed to the song. This was never confirmed. And if there was any contributions, I think it took a different direction because they recorded that song when they were touring the States as a 4-piece in 1998. I think they did some of the recording of it in Nashville. And it was really about, they wrote that about her leaving. And so it was an interesting try, and it would be the sort of de facto lead single from what would be their third and so far conclusive record.
You know, I wonder, what do you think if In Vogue would have done like a goodbye song to Dawn? Like, I mean, not called it goodbye per se, but, you know, it was like when EV3 came out, they never really acknowledged, like, we lost a member. They just kind of went on with, you know, whatever. It's the lead single. I wonder if releasing a record about losing friendship or something, I wonder if that would have been something that could have helped them as a trio.
I think that's an interesting idea, or like, or address it, some version of addressing it artistically, even if they didn't do it. Like, I think about I'm gonna go to forgive me, Fifth Harmony, when they lost,
not that
Camilla,
VMA's performance, when they
kicked her off the stage, when they knocked that girl off the stage that was supposed to sort of be the shadow of Camilla. Yeah, it was like, it was shady. It was certainly like a moment like they designed that for television to get the sort of like reaction, but it's still sort of like signaled a change. And that album actually was not as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it was a growth moment for them. And so I think it could have been interesting to sort of like, for In Vogue to have signaled that sort of change and some kind of, especially like, given the drastic sort of aesthetic adjustment or evolution of the EV3 era. So yeah, I agree.
And because I think In Vogue, they seem to always kind of take like the
safe way,
the safe PR route. Like, we're just gonna go on like it doesn't exist. Like, you were 4 people at once. Someone is gone. The person who sang on your last biggest hit is gone. Like, you have to acknowledge that in some way, you know, even if, you know, but I guess, you know, they want to be safe. But that would have been interesting to kind of, you know, to hear them release a little song called Moving On, or, you know, A New Day, or
I just wished like people would do like the sort of inverse Dreamgirls finale sometimes, where like you just have that one final performance of like, you know, instead of, you know, at the end of Dreamgirls where they welcome Effie back, it's like the opposite, right? Like, you have the final performance and then like Dawn walks away, and then like Danity Kane did that actually. I thought that was really interesting. Danity Kane, when they did the reunion situation where they came back as 4 and they came back without D Woods, they did all of the greatest hits as a 4-piece, and then they were introducing new music, and they sort of like had Andrea give like a little speech, and then Andrea introed the 3-piece to do the new music. And I just thought that was an interesting like touch. Like, so like something like that could have been really interesting, and could have maybe been like even if she didn't want to do it, it could have given a blessing, or it would have worked really nicely in both Dawn's favor and In Vogue's favor to do some kind of like transition moment. But anyway. Oh, the past. Let's talk about formation. So despite being from different eras and musical landscapes, In Vogue and the Spice Girls shared some similarities in how they were formed. Both groups were carefully curated by industry professionals. In Vogue was put together in the late 80s by producers Denzel Foster and Thomas McElroy, who handpicked the members based on their vocal abilities. Similarly, the Spice Girls were assembled through auditions in the mid-90s, where members were selected with distinctive personalities and vocal talents.
Each group was comprised of members with distinct personalities and roles. In Vogue embodied sophistication and harmony, while the Spice Girls embraced individual personas, scary, sporty, baby, ginger, and posh, that resonated with diverse audiences.
Both groups were constructed around a particular image and message. In Vogue projected elegance, blending R&B with empowering messages. The Spice Girls championed girl power and individuality, using their diverse personas to convey messages of empowerment for young women.
Considering their carefully constructed formations, how did this initial curation impact the long-term legacy of each of these groups? Could it have contributed to In Vogue's downfall, or the popularity that the Spice Girls still seem to have? For instance, if In Vogue had consisted of siblings, perhaps they may have remained together through all of the challenges.
Interesting.
Well, the elephant in the room is that In Vogue is still active. The Spice Girls haven't recorded an album in over 20 years as a unit. But in terms of their reach, they may have more popular culture reach. But I also think some of that is just down to the two sort of specific genre spaces and how they interact. But that's not to diminish. I think I'm a quality, not quantity. I mean, the Go-Go's, who one of the greatest girl bands ever, they're only one album more than the Spice Girls. They have 4 that they've done, and they haven't done another album since God Bless the Go-Go's in 2001. So I think the thing is, I think certain groups have their journeys to walk. I personally would have loved for the Spice Girls to have taken the approach of what Take That, who were sort of a lot of people compared them, because that at the time they were told in the British market that girl groups would not work, because the only girl groups that were really hitting in the UK were sort of taking their cues from America, i.e. TLC and In Vogue. The Spice Girls sort of put that whole convention on its head. They said that, no, we can be commercially viable and we can, do this without that. But I mentioned Take That because even though Robbie Williams would go off and become this huge phenomenon on his own that would rival Take That, the group was able to perform without him in 2006 and really find they did 2 albums without him and find success. And he came back to the group, and they had an even bigger project with Progress, and then he would leave and they continued to be successful. And I think Jason Orange retired, and so it's now just the 3 of them. I mentioned all that to say that's kind of how I always wanted the girls to be. And I think Emma and Mel B were both kind of on record as saying they would kind of go off, do solo projects, come back, go off, do solo projects, come back. And it just happened to be, I think, that because they're all very headstrong women who walked very different paths professionally and personally, it ended up going the way it did. Victoria was kind of bullied out of the music industry. That would never happen today. But they literally harassed that woman out of the British music industry.
They harassed who?
Victoria Beckham. They kind of basically harassed her until she stopped making music.
What do you mean?
You have to read the book. She would record 2 others. She's done 3 solo albums on her own, only one of which was commercially released. Her self-titled record, Victoria Beckham, were songs that she was involved in writing primarily. And she had a hand in putting that record together. And I think that's why when the record didn't perform to what the expectation was, it produced 2 top 10 hits, and it entered the top 10, but it didn't. I think it was the first Spice Girls record not to certify, Spice Girl related record to not certify. I think that was damaging to her. That really hurt her creative ego and spirit. And so then she went and she made these records that were kind of engineered. They were very track based. It felt like they just handed her a track and she sang over top of it. Now, there are elements of those records I appreciate, particularly the double A side, which just had its 20th anniversary last month, Let Your Head Go This Groove. But, which was her last, because she's the only Spice Girl to not have a #1 solo single, but she's also the only Spice Girl to have placed all of her solo singles within the British top 10, and the only one, and she has the highest first week sales for a solo Spice Girl. Without
Did she put out Don't Disturb This Groove?
She worked with one half of the system, David Frank. He worked with her on her first record, her self-titled album, and then they worked together again when she covered Don't Disturb This Groove. She sort of reworked it as just This Groove, part 1.
Did they put it out?
Yeah, it was her last single. It was a double A side with Let Your Head Go.
Oh,
all of that is explained in there's a whole section in the book that details that. It's actually called In My System Deep Inside of Me, Gotta Let It Out, an exploration of Victoria Beckham's final recordings. So you should check that out.
I just want to know, was she mad when Beyonce did Resentment?
Probably not at all. I mean, I think it was probably a better fit with Beyonce than it was with Victoria.
What's crazy, I remember downloading that years ago. Like, that was my Napster phase, and I used to play that version by Victoria Beckham.
Oh, yeah. I wish I could believe you, then I'd be alright. But now everything you told me really don't apply to the way I feel inside. Loving you was easy once upon a time, but now my suspicions of you have multiplied. soul because you lied.
And then cut to 2004. I hear Beyonce, so I'm like, oh wow, this is very different.
Well, and then there's Jasmine Sullivan's version. So like, there's just some really, just kind of, I just love them all because I just think it's a great song, and I just think like they're just such different takes. And Victoria's is so understated and kind of delicate, and you know, it's just, I don't know. I have a soft spot for Victoria Beckham's. Like, I'm maybe she could just do no wrong.
No, Victoria's an interesting woman. I think the problem with Victoria, it wasn't really her fault. It was just that her celebrity profile, her and Jerry probably had the biggest celebrity profiles of the five. But whereas I think Jerry musically was able to sort of, through just sheer force of will, she was able to push through that. She pushed through it because she actually held the record as the British female artist with the most number ones on her own. She held that record for 12 years, but Victoria, I don't think she had enough strength to do that. And I think, especially I would recommend watching the David Beckham documentary. I think being a young mother, being a wife, I just think she's like, I can't do it all like this. And I think, there was a lot of pressure on all of them, you know, and I think that's the thing. And so I think it was just easier for her to kind of let go, which is kind of sad when you think about it. But, bringing it back to the question, I think the thing is, I think the groups took the journeys that they're meant to take. The great thing about the Spice Girls is that they still are able to compete on the contemporary stage with any active act now. I think I was reading in an article at the time when they did their last reunion tour, and it's not just, and I'm not knocking the people who tap in this, you gotta do what you gotta do. When they tour, it's not just only nostalgia. They're selling tickets and reaching audiences in the same way that like a Harry Styles would. That's impressive for a group that hasn't had an active record in the market as a unit in over, you know, we're coming up on 25 years for Forever in 2025, I think. Yeah. Or no. Yeah. 2020 next year. It'll be the 25th anniversary of their third album. So, which was out the same year as Masterpiece Theater. Both of them were, which is their fourth album, In Vogue's fourth album. Yeah. So, but yeah, so that's it. I've said my piece on that.
I'll just say that I think what's interesting about the formation of the groups is the sort of, you can get the spirit of each of the groups by looking at the formation and what happened and continued after they were formed and by whom they were formed. So like the sort of like kick-ass rebellious kind of spirit of the Spice Girls was pretty evident quickly after the formation of the group, because they, you know, ditched the folks and went and found their own sort of like path with their own folks that they chose. And that is very opposite to In Vogue, who have been pretty, and still to this day in its current formation, are very loyal to Foster and McElroy. So that's at least an interesting note in terms of how we might compare the two's journeys with the folks that were heavy-handed in their creation. Okay, so when we think about the impact that these groups have had on their genres, their respective genres, and, you know, the industry as a whole, what do you, like with In Vogue, what do you think that their sort of overall impact was with R&B? Like, we don't talk enough about how, not just with girl groups, how they actually influenced the genre. And similarly with the Spice Girls and pop. I think the obvious answer with In Vogue is like, the harmonies with which they sang and that they crafted, and I just think the way that they sang was not new by any means, but I think they brought it back in a way that kind of demanded better of the genre. Like, I think that like they were some singing ass women who their presence on the scene meant that you couldn't come as a group of women and not be of a similar sort of caliber. So I think that they set a bar. That's what I guess I'm saying with R&B, and particularly girl groups in R&B.
I feel that, to build on that's a great point, Josh. I think that they sort of pulled that, what was probably seen as traditional by the end of the 80s, that traditional R&B girl group archetype or aesthetic, the vocalizing, the 3 Degrees, the Pointer Sisters, Sister Sledge, and they put it within a new school sort of kind of vibe. And I think that was just very dynamic. I think more than anything, it showed that you could take two dichotomous, almost opposing musical aesthetics, and you could forge not only a link, but you could make them complement each other. And I think that not only influenced R&B, I think it influenced music because it laid the groundwork for the Spice Girls. Now, whereas the Spice Girls, I think for them, it was twofold. They were obviously inspired by the contemporary elements of the R&B aestheticism of TLC and in Vogue, but they also are inspired by their 80s foremothers, Bananarama, with their whole DIY aesthetic and sort of that ambitious sort of vibe. Granted, Bananarama were a bit more cool because they were post-punk, and both in terms of their initial origins, pre-Stock Aitken Waterman collaboration, and just the way they comported themselves. But I think they took that, and then I think what really made the Spice Girls singular is that they were autonomous in every way, from image to marketing, branding, which they all decided, but most importantly, their music. They wrote everything they did. And I think that set them apart from any girl group or girl band, which typically would either have maybe 1 or 2 members who would handle the writing, or they were having the material primarily curated for them, even if they could write, which was En Vogue's thing. En Vogue did write. I think that people knew more about that. But on the whole, most of En Vogue's work that is known public facing was written for them by their production team. So I think that what the Spice Girls did, that helped set them separate from any girl group or girl band, regardless of genre, that autonomy. And I think they were also able to carry that over into their solo careers. And I think that's why they were able to do that as well. And no disrespect to Girls Aloud or Sugar Babes, who were the 2 biggest pre-Little Mix girl groups to emerge in their slipstream. I don't think either of those groups had, in my opinion, more a patch on the Spice Girls. They might be cooler.
I think with the Spice Girls, particularly in the UK, though, I think, if anything, the brand of like girl power, girls, coming together, that whole thing, I would assume comes from the Spice Girls, right?
Well, do you have the riot? I think the thing was they took it to a different place. You have the Riot Girl movement, which is going on with a group called Shampoo, who was separate from like Eternal, or they were different from the other mainstream R&B or mainstream girl groups making it in the UK, because they were sort of taking their cues from America. And then Bananarama was in their wilderness period at that point. They were still active, but they were putting out records primarily to their base at that point. They hadn't had their commercial renaissance yet. I think the one thing that gets glossed over with the Spice Girls that bothers me, though, is the creative autonomy. I think that's what made it, and paired with the brand imaging autonomy, that really makes them singular. Like when I think of iconic girl groups, when you think of creative and sort of image wise, they're that silhouette, as I would say, so to speak, they're up there with like the Supremes. So much so, I think that a lot of the groups that would come in their wake wouldn't know what to do with them. Like Girls Aloud were very much like En Vogue. They were produced by a popular pop production clique called Xenomania. They were sort of almost like a showcase for them. And then the Sugar Babes sort of were returning to what I call that TLC En Vogue kind of aesthetic, where they were sort of doing a British impersonation of American music, which made them cooler to critics. But I don't think it particularly made their music that dynamic. In my personal opinion, doesn't,
do you like When the Rain Falls?
By Sugar Babes?
Yes.
I'm not the only group that I really rate with the girls are All Saints. And that's primarily because, and I think it's fascinating that almost all of their the lyrics are written by Shaznay Lewis, who's the black member. She does the bulk of she's like the Nona Hendrix of that group. Sugar Babes, I respect them. I would never deny their impact. For me personally, I'm just not a fan, because if I want to hear American R&B music, I'll listen to that. and it's not to say that, because the Spice Girls obviously had their own take on that. That was a part of their sound. But there's something about Sugar Babes. It just comes off as a bit of an affectation to me. And it's just easy for people to say they're cooler because, you know, they didn't have dolls or a movie. I'm like, okay, that was like 1 year and like a 5-year arc for the Spice Girls, 6-year arc for the Spice Girls people want to focus on. They ignore everything else they did. They ignore the fact that they worked with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. They ignore the fact that they worked with Rodney Jerkins, you know, and that's to say nothing of the people they worked with on their solo records, none of which the Sugar Babes were ever able to achieve. I mean, I think that Siobhan lady did a record that people love. And I'm not a fan of Mutya, whatever her name is. She's not very nice.
Who are they? Sugar Babes members?
Yeah, those are the primary, and I forget what the other one's name is. Mutya made a comment about Kylie Minogue, about 3 years ago, and that kind of, and you can have your opinions, but just, it was nasty and rude and dismissive. And I'm like, she's an institution.
Also, it feels like, I don't know. Maybe this is like sort of not being part of the UK sort of like scene when like, so I feel like I only know Sugar Babes through like a very imported kind of like, I had to go seek them out because they did not sort of like, the Spice Girls sort of permeated into the US in a way. Whereas my introduction to Sugar Babes was like through backdoor like forums and exploring like that sort of Napster era. And so it always felt like it is a bop, but it feels so disconnected from everything that they did before. So like it doesn't feel like there's like a cohesive sort of like movement through growth. It actually feels like Push the Button is really reductive based on like what I've sort of enjoyed about the earlier stuff from them. So like it's a great pop song.
What did you like the Adina Howard cover?
Oh, but even like if you go look at the different iterations of Sugar Babes, like by the time like their later stuff where like they lost, I mean like it was like a whole new group basically. Like it just had gotten so like, but whereas I think the Supremes got more interesting after Diana, I thought the Sugar Babes got really, really, really dumbed down. And the things that I like when you look at the original iteration of the Sugar Babes as like they were kids, it was very like kind of, it had a little angsty vibe to it. It had like a little bit of whatever. By the end, they were sort of like trying to compete with this sort of overly sexed, overly generic pop sound that it just didn't work for me. It doesn't work. But that's just my sort of interpretation as someone who was not part of that sort of culture. The one thing I will say, and maybe this is like untrue, I don't know, you have to school me, Quentin, but like I do think that like the thing I do love about the Spice Girls is that they were pushing an image forward, but they were also really, really smart to like put a hand back towards what I think were really sort of like Motown-esque songwriting styles. Like I think that they really had a way of crafting a pop song that had real R&B sort of sensibility to it, but also had such a brightness and something that feels very Motown-like to me sometimes. Not saying that like they were directly linking themselves back to that, but like the way that A Baby Love by the Supremes, for example, sort of like sticks in your brain, and the way that a song like that is written feels very similar. And I can see a link to something like Stop. You know what I mean? Like there's just sort of like this very sort of
you had 5 women who had 5 very different tastes. And I just want to, before I answer your question, I want to apologize. I didn't mean to get personal about the Sugar Babes. There's just, you know, even I try to always keep above.
You have an opinion about it. It's fine.
I try to stay above board because they have their place. But I think the thing is the Spice Girls had very developed and distinct personalities going into the group, and those continue to develop and grow within the group. And you had 2 songwriting camps, main ones that worked with them. You had the Absolute Boys, Andy Watkins and Paul Wilson, and then you had Matt Rowe and Richard Stannard. And between them, and we don't want to forget Elliot Kennedy, who was kind of in orbit. Andy Watkins and Paul Wilson went with Jerry when she left, and they did a lot of work with her on her solo records. But they wrote with them. And I think them being involved in the songwriting process, you kind of got snatches of each one of their interests. You had some of the rock stuff like Move Over. You had, some of the R&B element, which is a very prominent thread that was woven through their music. I think that, and again, excusing my saying white brothers and sisters, I think some of the white bass tends to act as if it didn't exist until the third album, which is just intellectually dishonest and just factually incorrect. And that's true of not just the groups up with the solo stuff. So I think them developing having those musical interests and tastes, they brought those things in with them. Whereas I think a lot of the groups that were to come in their wake, with the exception of All Saints, who kind of actually originated at the same time as the Spice Girls in 94, but they wouldn't arrive until a year after they arrived in 97, commercially speaking. But like Girls Aloud and Sugar Babes, they just felt it just was something about it was on the nose. We'll give a little mixed credit, though they were from, X Factor. I think that they kind of found a way to bring back more of a uniqueness, both to their image and their sound, and they continued to grow. And interestingly enough, when Jessie left, they did an EV3. They moved on. They repackaged just a 3-piece with that best. They kept it moving. They're like, she doesn't want to be with us. They embrace that hard reset. And that compilation they did, even though Jessie's on those hit records, they don't deny that, they presented as a 3-piece. So you see it's both In Vogue and the Spice Girls, both consciously and unconsciously reflected in other girl groups. So
the reception by critics versus the audiences. It's so interesting.
I just got sorry.
I was just going to say, it's so interesting that people, do people care about critics at this point? I mean,
speaking as an actual active critic,
I know. I thought I was out there saying it. No, but what I mean is this though. I just remember back in the day, critics' word was like their bond. It was just, people. If you got a bad review, it was devastating. I remember In Vogue talking about getting bad reviews if they got a bad review from the Luther Vandross tour, and they were afraid of what would happen. But now I don't know I think because of social media, everyone's a critic now, right? So everyone has access to the world and everyone puts their thoughts up. But I guess the critical reception of In Vogue, I don't really think commercial acts were ever very critically acclaimed. I can't sit here and say that I know what the critics said about either of them at the time, but since we were talking about the Grammys, the Spice Girls never were nominated and In Vogue never won one. So I think that's very indicative of the critics, that they were not as fond of them as the audience was, right?
I mean, the thing about that is that there were other commercial acts that did get nominated. I think some of that's just there is a bit of a bias towards some female acts and different things. But then on the other side, conversely, I think because In Vogue's an R&B girl group, they're going to get more critical favor than a pop group. People sort of dismiss the Spice Girls as if they were just fluff, frippery, pop-wet, which is a shame because I think there was always more depth and dimension to what they did than what was suggested. And as speaking as someone, they are the reason that I went from being an audience member to a critic, because I wanted to get people to engage with the music in a different way, to hear what I was hearing. I think In Vogue, and I'll do In Vogue first and do the Spice Girls. So with In Vogue, I think the thing is critics, I think, were kinder to the first two records. I think EV3 was sort of that transitional mixed reception. And then I think a lot of people just sort of either ignored or panned Masterpiece Theater versus engaging with it. But as I said on a previous episode, I think that Masterpiece Theater was this really interesting left turn and one of those weird, in a good way, R&B records of the 2000s. No one did a record like that before or since. And so I'd like to see critics separate from me or a few other people really reassess some of their work from EV3 onward, because they're very engaging R&B records that are interesting. Not everything works, but there's something there to be discovered. As for the Spice Girls, I think it's gotten better because I think just with time and when you have distance from things, people were able to view it more objectively. My only issue with the Spice Girls is that, and as someone who's written about them extensively, is to not view them solely through the lens of nostalgia, because one's nostalgia is not history. Just to bring a bit more of what I call well-rounded objectivity in terms of looking at what they were able to do as songwriters and singers, which I think is a compelling argument in and of itself. and also to look at the wider Spice Girls story separate from the first 2 records, and to really move into some of the more individual solo records, that third record that is a group, and everything else that would come after. Because when you look at that broader story, that's when you really realize how dimensional their story really is. And that's what I'm very proud of with the book, because I feel like the book takes you on a journey. It takes you from Wannabe up through to Melanie C's last single from her 8th solo album, Into You, from 2020. So I'm very proud of that. And obviously there's more to come, because there's going to be more records from them as an individual. And we could get new music. You never know. I don't think so, but again, never say never. So I think critically, it's just one of those things. I think it ebbs and flows. And I think distance really helps bring more perspective, I guess.
So, cultural influence. So how do you guys think that the groups became cultural touchstones?
I just think through sheer force of their creative will. I think their stories are compelling. They're still compelling. And I think their music is compelling. And I think that's what's going to keep them relevant. I think that term relevant is a subjective term in terms of how that manifests. But I think they will always be interested in Vogue and in the Spice Girls because, like I said, just the music and the story, their respective stories are just so rich and interesting and still developing. Even though like the Spice Girls aren't actively recording as a group, their story is still being told in other ways through their individual forays and other things that they've done collaboratively as a group. And I think the same thing with Vogue. I'm actually excited to see what Vogue will do next as well with their next project.
Yeah, I think I agree. I don't know how. I think they. Both groups represented such pivotal moments, I think, in the genres that they were in, and the visibility of women as a unit inside of those genres. And so I just think that it's a great alignment, the sort of time and place of when these groups came in and how they were able to dominate the way that they did. And we haven't seen groups really able to do that. I mean, we've seen obviously some, like we know the other groups that have been big, but like when I think about the evolution into girl groups now, we just don't see that kind of longevity with or without projects. I think like En Vogue's influence is a more subtle sort of subtly felt influence than the Spice Girls, for instance. But I do think that like it's undeniable that when you hear people like the great vocalists and girl groups and, singers talk about influences, a lot of those folks do go back to En Vogue in that way. So yeah, I really love the idea of like, I'm really interested in how folks build legacies now outside of just creating new work. And I like watching how the Spice Girls in particular, like how they still sort of leverage archival footage and how they sort of introduce themselves to new folks and new fans. And I'm curious to see how En Vogue could do a lot more of that, as opposed to just sort of sustaining the act is one thing, but I'm really curious how they could build a bigger legacy for themselves, given the body of work that they have and the visual sort of like, like I wish they would play around a lot more with like unseen footage and behind the scenes things and like unreleased videos and all these other kinds of things, the way that the Spice Girls kind of do, as a way to keep folks interested.
I think they all have to be on the same page to do that.
That's true.
But
that's true.
I think that timing is everything. And I think En Vogue and Spice Girls, they came out at a time where everything hadn't already been done. So they got to kind of be sort of a first of their time. Right now we live in an era where everything has been done. There's so much oversaturation in music. At this point, they're making samples of the sample. It's you have people now saying that, millennium fashion is a throwback, which is wild when I think, because I was like in that era, you know what I mean? But like, I don't think people are looking for individuality or creativity. People are just, it seems like everyone is just trying to do what's already been done. And so that's why a group like En Vogue and a group like the Spice Girls are totally, so important culturally, because I think they were really the first of their kind. They both definitely took influences from the people that came before them, but they were able to figure out how to make it uniquely their own. And so I think that's what really sets them apart.
All right, listeners, thank you for listening and tuning into another episode of Part of Us, an In Vogue Fancast. We encourage you to share your thoughts with us. Let us know what you thought of this episode, what other episodes you want to see us tackle. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, I don't know, then send us an email at partofusevf@gmail.com. Make sure you follow us on social as well. And thanks to our co-hosts, all of us getting together to talk about this cool episode and this cool topic. And we will see you all next time.
Bye.
Bye.
This episode of Part of Us at In Vogue Fancast was researched, written, produced, and edited by Matthew at Culture Inject Productions. We're more than just a podcast. We're a fan community. You can keep up to date on In Vogue and chat with other fans by visiting In Vogue Craze on Facebook. You can also follow us on YouTube and Instagram at In Vogue Craze and Twitter at Part of Us Fancast. Part of Us and In Vogue Fancast is not endorsed by In Vogue, E1 Music, or In Vogue Records, and is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. In Vogue and its names, images, and audio clips are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of their respective copyright holders.
Hold on. Can we pause for a quick second? Because I need to answer this. My mom. Hold on.
Who is the Baby Spice of In Vogue?
Terry.
I don't see it.
If Dawn is the Jerry and Terry's the Emma,
Terry's the sporty.
we're gonna lose somebody.
You just have to combine two people.
I would give Terry Posh. I would give her Victoria Beckham. Their energies.
I would give that to Cindy. Maybe I'm just thinking about like this sort of statuesque, sort of like the longness of them, but like maybe not, because I would say that
Maxine's a blend of Melanie C and Melanie B. Cindy's probably Victoria. Terry's Emma, and Dawn is Jerry.
I agree. That's good. That's good.
Because I think she has Melanie C's like that raw talent, but I think she's got that bit of spunk that Mel B has. Maxine does. So I think she's got both of those attributes. Cindy's kind of got that mystique that Victoria has. There is a gentleness about Terry, at least to me. I've always thought there was a softness to her. And then Dawn just has that sort of that quality. She's got that sparkle that still is compelling.